Friends, I'll admit it, the world is a-changin'. There are some changes that we love, that we embrace, like more power. But then there are changes not so much. Like, for example, if you live in Los Angeles and know Mayor Garcetti or that complete and utter moron Mike Bonin and their test tube baby of traffic calming that's trying to make a city like Los Angeles, a car city, into Portland, a bicycle city, you know of what I speak. But this is not about politics, this is about cars, specifically Gojira. You and I love the R35 because it's not perfect. It has rough edges, it makes weird and stupid noises. It's designed to scare us, and we love that. However, the trend nowadays is for car companies to round the edges, to make them more perfect, less scary, so more people buy them. And this is an example. However, they still have thought about people like us. Let me show you. So let's start the old R35 2017 model. Sounds like a GTR, right? We love it. Granted, I haven't even moved it so you don't hear the wonky clutches, which again, I love. However, they've installed a switch down here. And I don't know if you can hear it, it's just a little bit more quiet. It turns off one side of the exhaust. So the idea is you could put your grandmother, your mother, or your girlfriend in this car and they won't look at you as the nutter that you are. But we still know that we're complete nut jobs and we love this kind of stuff. And this is why I think they hide the button down here so we forget about it and keep it in Gojira mode. So at the top of the episode, let's take a stroll down recent memory lane with this, the current generation of the GTR, otherwise known as the R35. Now, I don't know if this shocks you, but it shocks me. This car is 8 years old. It was introduced back in 2009. And Nissan has been very honest that for 2017, there is A, the most ambitious changes, and B, most of them are focused on refinement. However, there are some changes that are focused at us broken car guys and gals, like more power. So let's unpack what is underneath the hood. And that is the same, really, 3.8 twin-turbo V6. It is still hand-built in Japan by the Takumi, the craftsman. In this case, it is built by Itsumi Shioya. Itsumi Shioya, arigatou gozaimasu. Output is now up to 565 horsepower, comes in at a relatively aggressive engine speed of 6,800 RPM. The torque, 467, comes in at a moderate engine speed of 3,300 RPM, stays flat all the way up to 5,800 RPM. Now, if you are keeping score, that is 20 horsepower and 4 pound-feet of torque more than the previous car, and they arrive at that through two things. They change the ignition timing and a little bit more boost. Now let's unpack a couple of other things. Number one, it's a 9-to-1 compression ratio. Number two, you know we talk about in the Corvette Z06 and the Porsche 911 Turbo episodes, the dry sump lubrication system. That is mainly beneficial in the case of packaging. So an engineer can take the engine, put it lower in the car for a lower center of gravity. This is unusual in that, yes, it does have a dry sump lubrication system, but I think it's the only car I know of that has both dry sump and wet sump. Then there is the packaging of the engine itself. This part around here, we're going to spend a lot of time between this episode and the full first drive review talking about some of the structure and some of the materials in its construction. Do you remember in the i8 and the i3 episodes how I basically beat you over the head with carbon fiber reinforced polymer? Well, they don't have their own factory, and it's not a fancy name, it's just carbon fiber composite, which is a fancy way of saying plastic and carbon fiber fused together to mimic the properties of ultra high-strength steel, but have a much lower weight. And then there's the packaging of the engine itself. It sits on 3 engine mounts. The 2 in the front are liquid filled. And then notice where the engine sits. It's way back in the engine compartment. So this is very similar to the Aston Martin or the Corvette Z06, a front midship design where it sits right at the front axle or behind it to benefit in weight distribution, which really focuses on driving dynamics. So while we're on that topic, perhaps we should unpack driving dynamics. Okay, so this is the point of the episode where you really need to bust out either your notebook, your iPad, or your Etch-a-Sketch, because there's almost too much to discuss in terms of driving dynamics, but let's give it the old college try. So remember where the engine was. They call it premium midship underneath the hood, and the reason we're able to stuff the engine so far back in the car is because the transmission is not here, it's here. It's a 6-speed automated manual unit, much like it has been since, 2009. Well, that is not unique, but do you remember the episode we did with the brilliant chief engineer of the Corvette and super great guy, Taj Jukter? Well, he spent a lot of time talking to us about why he fit a torque tube, a special one at that, to his C7. Well, that's not unique, and it's not unique to just the Corvette. What is unique is this transaxle equipped car is not fitted with a torque tube. Instead, the Nissan engineers opted to fit it with a drive shaft that is comprised of some sort of version of carbon fiber reinforced polymer. Now this, to me, falls underneath the heading of beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because Taj, he'll swear up and down that you want the torque tube in a car like this because it increases the structural rigidity of the vehicle, makes it stiffer, thus improves the driving dynamics. Well, the Nissan engineers, they'll tell you a different story in that they didn't fit the torque tube to the car to separate the rear suspension from the front suspension to deal in its own plane of motion. This is something we're going to have to really focus on in the full first drive review. But anyway, let's go to some other suspension bits. And the front, that is a double wishbone set up here. In the rear, it is a multi-link unit. But this is where we get to the dirty little secret, unless you have been living under a rock since 2009. This is not a light car. It's almost 4,000 pounds. It's 3,929 pounds. But I find it interesting that Nissan continues with the theme of using some lightweight materials throughout the car, like we talked about underneath the hood. Here, some of the links, the upper and the lower, are aluminum. Then some other bits about the suspension. The front has a stabilizer bar, 34 millimeter diameter. The rear also a stabilizer bar, but it's hollow. Again, lightweight stuff. Then the brakes, 15.35 inch diameter in the front, 15 in the rear. The calipers, Brembo all the way around, 6 piston in the front, 4 piston in the rear. Then we need to get to kind of like the reason for being for this thing. Also, unless you've been living underneath a rock since 2009, you would know that this is all-wheel drive. And this, to me, is what makes this car so special, because it makes you, even if you are a shite driver, it makes you look like a rock star, and here's why. Most of the time, it drives 100% of the power to the rear wheels. However, it could send up to 50% of the power to the front wheels. Now, most cars, all-wheel drive cars, they say, oh my God, we're losing grip here, let's send power to the front. Not so here. Like, the secret sauce is the Nissan engineers have programmed a target into its brain. So there are multiple points of input, not just losing grip here or over there. It's losing grip or speed of the vehicle, input on the steering, yaw, a number of other things, and then it compares that to the target in the brain, and then it corrects for your bad driving. This is why it's a very special vehicle. You will find out when we drive it. And you know what? If you haven't seen our Nismo, our previous edition of the Nismo when we drove it on a drag strip, check that out before you drive the full first drive review. Anyway, let's get back to this. Not an inconsequential size of vehicle either. So 911 comparison vehicle, right? So that is 96.5 inch wheelbase. The Corvette, Taj's car, that's a 106.2 inch wheelbase. This 109.4. So the biggest of the bunch. But it is still like rip your face off stupid fast, which you need to come back for the full first drive review. Okay, let's go on the inside, because believe it or not, most of the changes are there. So at the top of this episode, I shared with you, that Nissan shared with me, that most of these changes for 17 were focused at refinement. Well, the most noticeable, at least to the naked eye, is the interior, specifically two bits. There's the general design and shape of the dashboard. We won't discuss that because I never like to tell you guys what you can see. And then there is the color and trim and some of the details. That we will discuss. So you notice this wonderful color interior. They call it red amber. It is optional. It is very expensive, but a big round of applause to Dan at Nissan for speccing this specific vehicle out like it so we can see it. Basically what it is a unique color. And most car manufacturers don't take the risk in something oddball like this. Usually you get like a tan, a gray, or a black interior. Here they've actually given us a splash of color, and it's a two-tone. So that really stands out. Then there's the contrasting stitching here. And then, and I think this is most important, and that's the tactile feel here, here, and here. This is all Napa leather. But this one, the red amber, and I believe there's another color which you can do this with, the seats, they switch over to semi-aniline leather, which if you've been in a Cadillac Escalade Premium or like a very fancy version of an Audi A8, it's the same grade of leather. In a GTR, then they've changed the seats themselves where they're a little more sculpted, so there's more support, and the seat back itself is a bit lighter because of the construction. Then there's the interaction, the UX of the vehicle. So one thing I've always loved about the GTRs, there are toggle switches, man, like old school Jaguar from like 1961 toggle switches, and they still have them here. However, not as all perfect in Camelot. As we've seen in the changes in the car world, there's always this unified controller, and now it's made its way to the GTR. It controls everything in terms of infotainment, but what the Nissan designers have done has opted to keep the redundant controls. So the HVAC, the toggle switches, and some of the buttons up here. So very happy we've got this happy medium for us like old school car guys. I believe that is everything inside. We will spend some more time talking about some of the changes here as well as coming down the road for Nissan in the full first drive review. I don't know about you guys. I'm tired. That's a lot to cover. Apparently I forgot something, didn't I? Oh yes, the aerodynamic bits. But before we get to the aerodynamic bits, I want to point out, someone got all festive for July 4th here, our country's 241st birthday, but he did want to remind me that there are some changes in the look of the car, and again, I never like to tell you what you can see, so it does look different, and they did try to graft on the corporate V Nissan grille. That is not what we need to focus on. There is some function to this. Like, for example, the hood, it's been restructured, so it's now 30% stronger. And then notice the whole front end's been resculpted here. And the idea is to steal some of the aerodynamic logic from the Nismo we drove, what, almost a year and a half, 2 years ago. So there's less air that can get underneath the car, so there's less lift, more downforce, and they've kept the coefficient of drag at 0.26. Is that correct? Apparently I got that correct. So with that, let's put all this aside. We will spend more time on the 2017 R35 GT-R in the full first drive review, so make sure you come back for that. But in the interim, I want to leave you guys with a question. The question kind of ties into some of those financial episodes that we've been talking about, and this one is specific to this car. I have, of course, I've had this car a week now, and I'm on every night looking at the values of these things used because I'm thinking, this would be pretty cool for a used car. So my question to you is this: if you have one of these, it's got to be an R35, it's the only one I want to know about. How much did you pay for it? Like, and tell me, how much did you pay? How many miles? So how old was it? And most importantly, what region of the world do you hail from? Let me know in the comments below or via our social media, MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And with that, he wants to remind you that you want to unsubscribe from us, right? Unsubscribe? And then resubscribe. Click notifications. This is how much YouTube has screwed up the platform. No matter if you're a YouTuber in cars, other genres, big or small. And then number two, a fun fact. And this is taking another stroll down memory lane. And he wanted to remind you that the GTR, was called the Skyline GT-R back then, started in 1969 with 158 horsepower. Until we see you next time, bis später. You want to say bis später? Bis später? He says bis später.